Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive trio catalogue from legendary guitarist, composer and bandleader Pat Metheny. So ever since Pat Metheny burst onto the scene in the 70s, Pat Metheny has played in a number of different settings, from duo to quartet to quintet to large ensembles to leading his own bands like the Pat Metheny Group, the Pat Metheny Unity Band / Unity Group, Side-Eye, and has also played in collaboration with a number of different musicians. But the one setting that Pat Metheny has always gone back to and revisited time and time again is, of course, the trio. And throughout Pat Metheny's legendary career, he has led some of the finest trios ever. Some have been excellent, some have been historic, some have been legendary. A couple of them have been very underrated, but each of Pat Metheny's trios have all been different, and they all showcase a different side to not only Pat Metheny's composing, but his guitar playing as well. So whenever the Pat Metheny group wasn't on the road, Pat Metheny would go out in a much smaller setting with a rhythm section and just play a bunch of different music that was completely far removed from what he was doing with PMG. Now, whereas PMG's music was very heavily orchestrated with influences of avant-garde, Brazilian, classical, chamber, to name a few, the trio, on the other hand, was a much more looser, freer, and at times an unplugged setting where Pat Metheny would play in a much more acoustic approach to his music. But there would still be the occasional wild moments. But for the most part, Pat Metheny Trio is much more of an unplugged setting for the legendary guitarist. And for today's special edition, I am going to be taking a look at Pat Metheny's trio recordings, which is a total of 7 albums. So we've got 5 studio albums and 1 double live album and 1 live EP. And some of the trios that Pat Metheny has led throughout his career has featured some of the greatest and most iconic rhythm sections of all time. Some of these rhythm sections have been historic, some have been legendary, and some, of course, have been absolutely excellent. And each of these trio albums that Pat Metheny has put out, they're all different, they all have their own personality, and they all showcase different sides to Pat Metheny's guitar playing and his composing. And the ironic thing about the trio is Pat Metheny started his solo career playing in a trio, and it's a format that he's revisited time and time again throughout his career. So long before there was even a Pat Metheny group, Pat Metheny had a trio, and any one of these albums could be a number one. There's no bad album in this trio catalogue of Pat Metheny's. They're all special and they feature some of the best music that he has ever put out in his career. So, as always, I am going to be talking about each trio album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge. As I said, none of these trio albums are bad. Obviously, there are some that are a little bit better than others, but I think what people will appreciate about Pat Metheny in a trio setting is he never revisits and does the same things. Each time he puts together a trio, they're all different. So we're going to start with the one that kicked all of this off, and ironically enough, this was actually the first ever trio that Pat Metheny put together. And this one would go on to make a lot of history. And this one came out in 1976. and this one is called Bright Size Life. So, Bright Size Life, as everyone knows, is the first ever Pat Metheny album, and it's a trio, and it features two legends, bassist Jaco Pastorius and drummer Bob Moses. Now, Bob Moses comes from the Gary Burton band, and Jaco Pastorius was not quite the man he was yet. He would go on to become the legend that we would all know after he joined Weather Report. So it's very interesting to hear an unknown Jaco Pastorius tearing it up with a young Pat Metheny, who's featured here on 6-string guitar and electric 12-string guitar. And these guys really burn it up. You know, it's a power trio, but not in the traditional sense. It's very laid back, it's very haunting, but still has plenty of fire. And for me, you know, as great as Jaco Pastorius' playing was with Weather Reports, which would come just a little while after this, I still say to this day that he has never sounded better than he did here with Pat Metheny and Bob Moses. He really stands out here. And even though this is 1976, the music is very advanced, very ahead of its time, very fresh, and hasn't dated at all. It's aged very well, and it's quite cool to hear a young Pat Metheny playing in this environment that will go on to play a big part in his career. So this is where it all started in 1976 with Bright Size Life, and it's a classic. It really is. It's an absolute classic trio recording, and it's brilliant. And all of the compositions are written and composed, with one exception of an Ornette Coleman track, who, as we all know, would go on to become an important collaborator for Pat Metheny many years later with their very out there Song X album. But a lovely album, great guitar playing from Pat Metheny, excellent bass work from Jaco Pastorius, and great drumming, of course, from the legendary Bob Moses. So we've got the title track, Bright Size Life, Sirrahorn, Unity Village, Missouri Uncompromised, Midwestern Night's Dream, Unquity Road, Omaha Celebration, and Round Trip / Broadway Blues. Excellent collection of songs from start to finish, and unbelievable musicianship from this trio, who, in my opinion, really burns it up. So the standout tracks for me are the title track, Bright Size Life, Cereborn, Missouri Uncompromised, Midwestern Night's Dream, Omaha Celebration, and Unquity Road. Brilliant trio album, and one that still gets talked about to this day, and rightfully so. It's a classic. Absolutely love it. And this is the one that pretty much kicked it off as far as Pat Metheny trio albums are concerned. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Bright Size Life, the one that started it all. Classic album, one of his best ever. Love it. So we move on to the next trio album, and this one came out in 1984. And for my money, this Pat Metheny trio album could very well be the greatest of all time for many reasons, mainly because of the rhythm section that's featured on this album, who are both legendary figures, iconic players in their own right, and sadly, two musicians who are no longer with us. And the magic that was created when these three got together is just unbelievable. And this trio album still gets talked about to this day, and rightfully so. And this one is called Rejoicing. So, Pat Metheny Rejoicing features bassist Charlie Hayden and drummer Billy Higgins, both longtime members of legendary free saxophonist Ornette Coleman. And of course, Pat Metheny and Charlie Hayden would go on to make a lot of history together, going all the way back to the classic double 8081, and they would go on to play with Abbey Lincoln and Michael Brecker and Milton Nascimento, among others. But when these three musicians got together, something very special happened, and it was just one of those situations where it all went well, everything went right, and I don't think any of these three musicians have ever played better than they did on Rejoicing, and it's a very special album. It really is. And the very fact that Charlie Hayden and Billy Higgins are no longer with us just makes this album twice as special, and it doesn't get any better than this. Rejoicing, for me, probably the greatest Pat Metheny Trio album of all time. Now, with Rejoicing in particular, it's a different kind of trio album compared to Bright Size Life. Bright Size Life was more rooted in jazz fusion, but it was still quite a laid back album. With Rejoicing, it's a little bit more freer, a little bit more looser, in some areas, a bit more wilder, and in most spots, very laid back, but has a very deep and rich sound. And a lot of the material that's featured on Rejoicing is kind of a mixture. So there's some standards, there's some Ornette Coleman compositions, and there's a couple of Metheny originals, but not as much. And we've got one Charlie Hayden original, but it's a great album, and there are some tracks on here that will go on to become legendary. So we've got Pat Metheny on guitars, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Billy Higgins on drums. Doesn't get any better than this. So we've got Lonely Woman by Horace Silver, which is one of the most gorgeous openers for any Pat Metheny Trio album. It features Pat Metheny on acoustic guitar. We've got Tears Inside by Ornette Coleman. Excellent track. We've got Humpty Dumpty by Ornette Coleman. Another great track as well. And we've got Blues for Pat by Charlie Hayden, which is just like in the name, it's kind of a bluesy track, and it's got some great bass work from Charlie Hayden. Then we got the title track, Rejoicing, which is brilliant, and one of my all-time favorite trio tracks, Story from a Stranger. So it starts off with haunting acoustic guitar playing, and then Pat Metheny really rips it up on guitar synth. And there's a really cool section where you got the acoustic guitar strumming away, and you got the guitar synth just absolutely going mad. It's one of the highlights of the entire album, in my opinion. And then we got the wild and crazy The Calling, which has just got all three of these musicians just playing like they're possessed, and it's just absolutely savage. And Pat Metheny's just ripping it up on guitar synth, and Charlie Hayden's just creating these bowing melodies on acoustic bass, which at times sounds like an airplane crashing. And Billy Higgins, he's just going absolutely mad on the drums. Absolutely brilliant. And then we got the very subtle and haunting closer, Waiting for an Answer, which is a co-composition by Pat Metheny and Charlie Hayden, which just features them playing as a duo. And it's a really peaceful and very unsettling way to close out Rejoicing, but tremendous album, in my opinion. So the standouts for me are Lonely Woman, Blues for Pat, Story from a Stranger, The Calling, and Waiting for an Answer. But the entire album, from top to bottom, is just excellent. And for my money, the greatest Pat Metheny Trio album of all time. Doesn't get any better than this. Love it. Classic stuff. So we move on to the next trio album, and this one came out in 1990, and this features one of the most legendary rhythm sections of all time, and I would put this one up there with the legendary rhythm section of Charlie Hayden and Billy Higgins, just in terms of their importance and their place in history. And this one is called Question and Answer. So I would put Question and Answer up there with Rejoicing. It's one of the greatest Pat Metheny Trio albums of all time, and it features bassist Dave Holland and drummer Roy Haynes, who we sadly lost just a few weeks ago. But this album is a little bit more different to Rejoicing and Bright Size Life. Bright Size Life, as I said earlier, a bit more rooted in jazz fusion. Rejoicing, probably more rooted in avant garde, but still quite laid back. Question and answer, I would say, is kind of like, in some ways, like an extension of PMG, but still very laid back and very unplugged. There's very little acoustic guitar playing, very little synclavier and guitar synth featured on this album. It's just a pure, straight guitar, bass, drums affair, and it really works. And it's a lovely album. It's a classic and one of the greatest Pat Metheny Trio albums of all time. And a lot of the compositions, of course, are written by Pat Metheny, and there are a couple of standards as well, including one Ornette Coleman original and a Miles Davis cover as well. Now, of course, Roy Haynes and Dave Holland are no strangers to Miles Davis. They've both played with him many times in their career, and both of these guys have played with Chick Corea as well. So there's a lot of history between Dave Holland and Roy Haynes. And when you add Pat Metheny into the mix, you just get pure magic. And wow, unbelievable album. And as I said, one of the greatest Pat Metheny Trio albums of all time. So we've got Solar, which is a great opener. Question and answer, one of the greatest Pat Metheny compositions of all time, one that he still plays quite a lot to this day. H and H, excellent track. Never Too Far Away, which is a lovely ballad. Law Years by Ornette Coleman, brilliant. Change of Hearts, which is just absolutely beautiful. All Things You Are, which Pat Metheny still plays quite a lot to this day, which was composed by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein. Old Folks is another great song as well. And one of my favourite tracks on this album, which is the closer, which is very similar to PMG, Three Flights Up. Love it. Great collection of songs from start to finish, and the production is excellent. All three of these musicians are on top form, and for me, the highlights of this album is Roy Haynes' drumming. He just sounds absolutely incredible, and his drum solos are really the highlight of this album. Dave Holland, rock solid bass player, lots of great bass playing and soloing from him, and Pat Metheny, he's on top form as always. So standout tracks for me are Solar, Question and Answer, H and H, Never Too Far Away, Change of Hearts, and Three Flights Up. But great trio album, one of the greatest Pat Metheny Trio albums of all time, as I said, and I will definitely put this up there with Rejoicing. It's an absolute classic, in my opinion. Love it. Great album. So we move on to the next trio album, and this one came out in 2000. And for me, it's another excellent Pat Metheny Trio album featuring two of the finest musicians ever. And this one is called Trio 99 2000. So, this trio album, unlike previous albums which featured some of the biggest names ever, this trio album features two very young musicians, bassist Larry Grenadier and drummer Bill Stewart. Now, Bill Stewart, of course, has played with Pat Metheny in the past on Pat Metheny and John Scofield's tremendous I Can See Your House From Here. And Larry Grenadier, of course, is a long-time member of pianist Brad Meldew's trio. So there's a lot of history between these two, and Bill Stewart and Larry Grenadier, they've played with a lot of different musicians throughout their respective careers, and they make an excellent rhythm section and match up very well with Pat Metheny. And this is just like question and answer, very little guitar synth and synclavier. This features Pat Metheny playing more acoustic guitar, so it's a much more unplugged environment compared to the previous trio albums, but still highly enjoyable and some excellent playing from all three musicians. And there's a mixture of originals, some standards, and a couple of PMG reworks. It's all here and it's brilliant. And this one, definitely put this one up there with some of Pat Metheny's other trio albums. So we've got Go Get It, which is a great opener with some hard hitting drumming from Bill Stewart. Giant Steps by John Coltrane, which is just gorgeous, just like the day. Great acoustic playing from Pat Metheny. Soul Cowboy is another great track. The Sun in Montreal is another brilliant track. Wayne Shorter's Capricorn is excellent. We Had a Sister, which originally appeared on Joshua Redman's Wish album, and PMG used to play this a number of times in their live shows with Pat Metheny going absolutely nuts on the acoustic guitar. But it's a very lovely and dark and brooding acoustic track, and it's one of my favourites from this album. What Do You Want is another great track as well. A Lot of Living to Do is excellent. PMG's Lone Jack, which gets a nice trio workout, is just amazing. And we've got Travels, which originally appeared on Pat Metheny Group's iconic live album called Travels of the same name. And it's the first official time that Travels gets recorded in the studio, and it gets a nice acoustic unplugged workout, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And it's a beautiful way to close out an excellent trio album, in my opinion. So the standout tracks for me are Go Get It, Just Like the Day, Soul Cowboy, We Had a Sister, Lone Jack, and Travels. But the whole album, from start to finish, is excellent. Pat Metheny is on top form on both electric and acoustic guitars. Larry Grenadier, one of the finest bass players ever. He just sounds right at home in this environment, and the same can be said also for Bill Stewart. He sounds great in every setting, but for me, he's really at his best in a trio environment, and he just sounds absolutely incredible. So there you have it. Pat Metheny Trio, 99 2000. Excellent trio album, and right up there with the other Pat Metheny Trio albums. Excellent stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one also came out in 2000, and it's a double live album, and it features the same trio lineup as Trio 99 2000, and this one is called Trio Live. So this is pretty much the tour of Trio 99 2000, featuring bassist Larry Grenadier and drummer Bill Stewart, and it features pretty much a lot of the material from that album, but it just gets a nice live workout, and it also features some other trio compositions and some reworkings of PMG material, as well as some new tracks as well that still haven't been recorded to this day. And as great as Trio 99 2000 sounded, it's excellent. I think these guys sound even better live and really get to stretch things out and go and take the compositions places where they didn't take it on the studio album. I think it's absolutely tremendous. So on disc one, we've got Bright Size Life, which I think is the best opener you could have for a Pat Metheny trio concert. It's absolutely brilliant. We got Question and Answer, which is nearly 20 minutes long, and Pat Metheny just goes absolutely nuts on the guitar synth and really stretches it out and takes it to the limit. Giant Steps is a great track as well. And then when we got Into the Dream, which is a solo guitar piece featuring Pat Metheny on 42 string percusso, and this leads into PMG's So May It Secretly Begin, which is a brilliant version. Then we got The Bat, which originally appeared on 8081, and it gets a nice trio working. All the Things You Are, which is brilliant. Then we got Disc 2, the iconic James, which is brilliant. Unity Village is excellent. Soul Cowboy is great. A lovely acoustic track, Night Turns Into Day. And we've got the dark and hard hitting Faith Healer, which clocks in at 18 minutes long. And it's just Pat Metheny just in pure savage mode and just goes absolutely mad on the guitar synclavier. And for me, it's pretty much like The Calling, Song X, Scrap Metal, all rolled into one. It's just absolutely mad. And then we got Counting Texas, which has got a very Texan feel with Pat Metheny playing fretless guitar. And it's a great way to close out the double album. But wow, what an unbelievable live trio performance, and all three musicians are on top form. So the standout tracks for me on disc one are Question and Answer, Into the Dream, So May It Secretly Begin, The Bat, and the standouts on disc 2 are James, Night Turns Into Day, Faith Healer, and Counting Texas. But the whole album is just an amazing live album. And the fact that it's a double just makes it even better. And it rocks. It really does. And wow, what an unbelievable trio. And the fact that out of all of the Pat Metheny trios that we've had over the years, this is the only trio that actually got a live album. So that says something right there. This was a very special trio. I would say different kind of special to Charlie Hayden and Billy Higgins and Dave Holland and Roy Haynes. They're special too, but I think this one was just a little bit more special. And the fact that we got this nice double live document to listen to just makes it even more better. So there you have it. Trio Live, brilliant live album, and right up there with Pat Metheny Group Travels. Brilliant stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next trio album, and this one came out in 2008. And this featured a rhythm section comprised of two of Pat Metheny's most recent and important collaborators. And prior to this trio project, these two gentlemen had never played together before, and they made up a very muscular rhythm section for the Pat Metheny trio. And they played together for round about 5 years before they even went into the studio and recorded this trio album. And for me, this was one of the best Pat Metheny trios that he had ever put together in recent years. And this one is called Day Trip. So Day Trip features bassist Christian McBride, who has played with Pat Metheny quite a lot back in the 90s, and Pat Metheny's longtime collaborator and drummer, Antonio Sanchez, who has played with Pat Metheny in virtually every situation and every setting and band slash project that the guitarist has ever put together. And Christian McBride and Antonio Sanchez prior to this had never played together before. And that's what makes Pat Metheny so special. He always puts guys together who have never played with each other. So this is a very special album, and wow, very different to the previous trio albums. Bit more muscular, bit more hard hitting, but very enjoyable nonetheless. Antonio Sanchez, a very different kind of drummer, a lot more power in his playing. He makes the music sound very muscular. And Christian McBride, he's such a rock solid bass player and has a huge sound on the acoustic bass. And he's just unbelievable in this environment. And Pat Metheny, what more can you say? He's the man. He sounds great in every situation he's in. And unlike previous Pat Metheny trio albums, this album features all original material. There's a couple of PMG reworks and one from the John Scofield I Can See Your House From Here project, but predominantly it's all new material and it's all originals, so even better. And we got the opener, Son of 13, which is excellent. At Last You're Here, which is brilliant. Let's Move, another great track as well. Snowver is a beautiful track as well. Calvin's Keys is excellent. Is This America? Katrina 2005, which is just absolutely beautiful with Christian McBride playing bowed melodies on the acoustic bass. Then we got the hard hitting When We Were Free, which originally appeared on Pat Metheny Group Quartet, and it gets a real workout here, and Pat Metheny just goes to town on the guitar synth. Dreaming Trees is beautiful as well. The red one, which is excellent. As much as I love the original with John Scofield, I think it sounds even better played as a trio. And he still plays this track quite a lot and has done in more recent years. And we've got the title track, Day Trip, which is just a great way to close out the album. And if you buy the Japanese edition of Day Trip, you get a bonus track called What's Not, which is also brilliant as well. So the standout tracks for me are Son of 13, Calvin's Keys, Is This America, When We Were Free, Dreaming Trees, the red one, and Day Trip. Brilliant trio album, one of the best ones that Pat Metheny put out in more recent years. And these guys just sound absolutely amazing together, and it's very special as well. Sanchez, he sounds great in every situation. McBride, he has never sounded better than he does in the trio environment. And Pat Metheny, well, he's always on top of his game. Love this album. So there you have it, Day Trip, one of the best Pat Metheny trio albums he has put out, and it's just absolutely magical. Love it. So we move on to the next trio album, and this one also came out in 2008, and it features the same lineup as the one on Day Trip, and this one is a live EP, and this one is called Tokyo Day Trip Live. So unlike Trio Live, which featured a lot of the material from Trio 99-2000, Tokyo Day Trip Live doesn't feature any material from Day Trip. It's got 5 brand new songs, and I get the impression that this was a warm up for a potential full Day Trip live album, which still has not come out to this day, but it's still an excellent album anyway. And as great as Day Trip sounded, I think the trio of Metheny, McBride, and Sanchez sounds even better live, and it really takes on a life of its own. And all 3 musicians are on fine form. So we've got the opener, Prosmo, which is a very dark and brooding opener with Pat Metheny playing electric sitar and McBride playing bowed melody lines on acoustic bass. Traveling Fast is a very fast paced number, just like in the name, which clocks in at almost 12 minutes long. It's excellent. Inori is beautiful with some gorgeous guitar playing from Pat Metheny on acoustic. And we got the fast and hard hitting Back Arm and Black Charge, which has just got Pat Metheny in full on shredder mode. Absolutely jaw-droppingly amazing. And we got the acoustic track The Night Becomes You, which is a great way to close out the EP. But I think the whole EP is just excellent. I would have liked to have seen this as a full live album, but it is what it is. But what we have got here is brilliant, and Sanchez just plays like a man possessed. He's such a powerful and muscular drummer. He's just all over this album. McBride, absolutely rock solid, as I said before, on acoustic bass, and he really plays with a very aggressive and hard hitting approach. Unlike a lot of the previous bass players, they bring more of a laid back approach. But McBride here, he's just a monstrous bass player. And Pat Metheny, he's just all over this album, switching between electric, acoustic guitars, guitar synth, and sitar as well. He really has a strong presence, and he just sounds right at home with these 2 guys. Unbelievable. And the standout tracks for me is Prosmo, Inori, and Back Arm and Black Charge, but the whole EP from top to bottom is just excellent, and would have loved to have seen this trio live. I mean, I've seen some films and they were just incredible, but wow, this trio really smokes. Unbelievable stuff. So there you have it. Tokyo Day Trip Live EP. Tremendous live album. Love it. So, which Pat Metheny Trio album do I think is the best one? Well, as I said at the beginning, there's no bad album. They're all excellent. They're all different. They all have their own personality. Some are classics, some are legendary, some are excellent. But as I said, any one of these Pat Metheny Trio albums could easily be a favourite or a number one. But if I had to go with the best Pat Metheny Trio album, which also happens to be my all-time favourite, I'm definitely going with Rejoicing, because for me, this was the benchmark for the Pat Metheny Trio. As much as I love Question and Answer, Trio 99-2000, and even Day Trip, for me, this is the go-to album. If I was to recommend one Pat Metheny Trio album, it would definitely be Rejoicing. Does not get any better than Pat Metheny Charlie Hayden, and Billy Higgins. It's a classic trio album, and for my money, the greatest Pat Metheny trio album of all time. Love it. So there you have it. It's Pat Metheny, Rejoicing. For my money, the best trio album ever, and my all-time favorite Pat Metheny trio album. Love it. Doesn't get any better than that. Tremendous stuff. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Pat Metheny trio album? Is it Bright Size Life, Rejoicing, Question and Answer, Trio 99 2000, Trio Live, Day Trip, or Tokyo Day Trip Live EP? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite trio albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.